Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive, doing what I love to do, mix a little sports, a little political nature, all of it brought to you by our friends at Taharka Ice Cream, made here in Baltimore. Awaken more than just your taste buds, the award-winning ice cream serving up social change. We usually stay here in Baltimore for our guests, and I probably could ship him some Taharka, certainly could ship him some crab cakes from Fadley's, and if he ever gets up here, he's the perfect guy for us to spend a little bit of time with some shrimp and grits. Don Moeller, you've been reading Mark Leibovich for a long, long time, as have I, but the big game caught me a couple of years ago when he went sort of underground into the NFL, into my world, and NFL owners' meetings, and onto the back of Jerry Jones's bus. Moeller, if you want a good summer reading book down there on the Eastern Shore, I'm going to recommend The Big Game. It's where sort of politics and Donald Trump and Jerry Jones sort of intersect. So it is my pleasure to welcome Mark Leibovich on to Baltimore Positive for the very first time, but back on to WNST. What's going on? Nothing going on down on the D.C. thing, on the beat down there these days, right?
No, nothing. I'm just wandering the streets. You know, it's oddly quiet, like it is sort of everywhere, I guess. I mean, this is obviously not a normal year, and I was supposed to be doing campaign reporting and Washington reporting, and there's plenty of Washington reporting, but a lot of it's happening sort of behind masks and literal masks as opposed to the figurative masks that we usually have around here. So, you know, it's hot. That happens every summer. And I don't know. It's tiring. I'll tell you that much. I mean, I think I'm just thankful for being able to have a job and being healthy. So, I mean, I'm sort of like everyone else, and hopefully the important categories are taken care of. But no, this is crazy. I mean, Trump is going into some pretty uncharted areas, you know, bringing tanks into streets, and everyone's trying to adapt, and sports is no different. So this is definitely a collision between a lot of worlds, but I wouldn't say anything about it is normal or predictable.
I've been threatening Don for months that I was going to have you on, and I figured whenever we had you on, it'd be interesting. Here I am ready to beat you up about the Patriots and Tom Brady and the Red Sox and all that stuff. But, I only had one thing written down, and my only question for you is, what the hell's going on down there? That's all I have for the whole segment. I'm going to let Don handle the rest of it,
Well,
Don, you want to take this?
I am going to jump in, Mark, because you started right with my very first note, and that is, I look and I think back. There were rumblings at the time back in the 70s that Richard Nixon had considered martial law, and when he was involved in in impeachment, that was going to be a card that he was going to play. And here we are in 2020, and I had an uncle call me the other day. Mm-hmm. And, he's getting close to 80 years old, and he just said, does this scare you as much as it scares me? And the reaction that I'm getting from everyone, Mark, is this move of sending some kind of force, we don't even know, I don't think good reporters like into Portland and now maybe other cities. Give us your sense of that, and from a reporter's point of view, what do you make of it?
Well, I mean, it certainly is. I mean, it has the makings of a tip of the iceberg scenario where, he has sort of rhetorically and politically over the last 3.5 years very much declared war on Blue America. And Blue America, for all intents and purposes, is urban America, right? It's pretty much every city in America over, maybe 150,000 is either run by or certainly populated by primarily Democrats. And, this, sort of sprouting out from that is the suburbs, is the Democratic and progressive base. It is probably much more so the future of America in that, it's much more diverse. Obviously, young people are voting overwhelmingly, much more Democratic than Republican these days. So, I mean, I think in many ways, there's, depending on your perspective, an optimistic or pessimistic scenario of what Donald Trump has been up to has been just like a last gasp of sort of 1950s Republican America, the sort of mythical America that was supposed to be made great again under Donald Trump. When in fact this is a very different country, as we're seeing playing out in friction every single day. And And look, I mean, the great equalizer here, and really the great menace here for Trump is the coronavirus, which he has no answer for, and it very well could cost him the election. And no, but I mean, I think no one thinks that these next 6 months are going to be normal or fun or predictable, and hopefully the center will hold in some kind of way that we have an semblance of a country coming up early next year. But I definitely am hearing similar things, which is that people are really scared and they don't like where this seems like it could be headed. And I guess we'll see.
The anti-science part of this, Mark, is probably the most demoralizing thing, to think that 63 million people could not just vote for this, go along with this, but then sort of buy into the fact of a hoax is happening around the world. And I've talked to Don at length about this many times, not just in writing books and the literacy of our culture and what is a fact for a journalist and proof of anything, that the internet doesn't have some other OANN, idea about QAnon and all this other nonsense. But more than that, the science of a pathogen that I know it's hard to sort of understand, but it really has been, willful ignorance, literally, by a large segment, not only of our population, but where you have Republican leaders in Georgia who don't know what the word asymptomatic means.
Right. No, right. I mean, what's amazing about this whole thing is that, and maybe this is optimistic. I don't think that this sort of know-nothingism is a growth vector in this country. I mean, I think overwhelmingly, I think you mentioned Nixon before. I mean, the difference between now and Nixon's time, between Trump's time and Nixon's time, is really, threefold. I mean, the internet exists now in a way that is more democratizing to information, good and bad. Fox News exists now, which has created this whole information ecosystem that Trump has certainly tapped into. And
isn't it more of a disinformation ecosystem, really? I mean,
yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I don't think anyone. I mean, there's all kinds of surveys and science that talk about, through education levels and sort of informedness levels of people who watch certain shows. So, and also, the third thing is, I mean, I don't think anyone sort of envisioned that the Republican Party would roll over to the degree that it has for Trump in a way that they didn't for Nixon.
Well, certainly toward the Russians. It's a different thing to say Tricky Dick was looking through some manila folders over at Watergate. I think it's a whole different thing to be in bed with Putin. I mean, and literally signing off on election interference that, Cambridge Analytica, all of that, right?
Right. Yeah, no, there's just a ton. But again, this doesn't happen if the Republicans on the Hill, almost to a person, don't just roll over. I mean, a lot of them, nearly half of them have quit or have been voted out. That's a significant number. But the Republicans who remain today are extremely Trumpy, and they control the Senate and they control a lot of the country. So.
And a lot of PAC money, international PAC money, from what I understand.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of power. Look, I mean, Fox is by far the top-rated cable news network. I mean, the right really controls talk radio, except for you, of course, except for Baltimore.
That's why we exist here.
Exactly. But, yeah, so, I mean, but look, the forces, I think, are pretty clearly drawn, and you do sort of wonder what Republicans' next act would be, in a post-Trump universe, if such a thing were imaginable at this point.
Well, that's a question that I have for you, Mark, and you and Nestor have been alluding to it, and that is this whole buy-in on the part of the Republican establishment. And again, Nestor mentions your book, The Big Game. I also am fascinated by the book This Town, where you took a really in-depth look at Washington and the relationships in Washington. And I'm wondering, given the book This Town, could you have predicted an entire party being transformed into what we call the Trump party as opposed to the traditional small C conservative? Could you see that coming down the pike?
That's a great question. I mean, I'll say this. I mean, what I could see coming was the possibility that some candidate could leverage this utter contempt for Washington and vice versa into a populist candidacy that could shock the world, as Donald Trump did in 2016. I mean, I think when I wrote that book, which was 2013, both in reporting the book and writing the book, but then in sort of seeing how the book was received across the country, which was, far more sort of bipartisan anger and sort of enlightenment, I guess, by, like, geez, we didn't know it was that much of a sort of singular racket, right? So I knew that there was a definite market for what Donald Trump decided to, or was able to tap into. I guess what I didn't fully appreciate when I wrote that book, and that was 7 years ago, was how easy it would be to break the whole thing down, and really some of the best guardrails of democracy could just be exploded along with some of the swamp he was allegedly trying to drain, but he hasn't really done that either. So, no, I mean, Washington is basically, I mean, you walk around here, I mean, it's still a really wealthy, comfortable town. I mean, it's weird these days because of the virus, and the virus is hitting us hard like it's hitting everyone hard, but it's basically a very affluent, comfortable city. People here are very comfortable, and the only real difference during the Trump years has been that there's been this big reality show going on in the White House, and the swamp has basically been converted into a gold-plated hot tub, right? But having said all that, I mean, there have been a number of Republicans, mostly people who don't have to run for re-election, who have shown me a fairly impressive amount of spine. Many of them are Republican consultants that I totally, had contempt for a few years ago, that I think, have handled themselves well. And again, I don't know if that is a proxy for a lot of former Republicans who live in the suburbs across the country who are going to vote overwhelmingly for Joe Biden and, whoever the next Democrat is. But I think...
well, Mark, where is the jumping off point for that person? I mean, I've been trying to figure that out. I am waiting for... Yeah. 5 Republicans in my world. 5, and I have a pretty sane group for the most part, right? Across all they're all white, obviously, right? Other than Michael Steele, and we had him on last week.
Right.
But they're all white. I'm waiting for 5 of them out of the 100,000 people I know to just drop me a note and say, you know what? I voted for this creep, but I'm not in line with it anymore because it had an R on it, and I thought he ran a legitimate business, and I thought, well, he must be a smart guy. I mean, look, and we find out that he's a real piece of feces, top to bottom, morally bankrupt all the way around. The Russians freeing Roger Stone, every part of this, and yet I still don't have anyone who's come back to me on that side and said, I might be wrong. That's rather frightening how far into this we are, 3.9 years, and how far along it is. And really, I thought race would be the jumping off point, Mark. I really thought, once he starts talking like that we're not going back to George Wallace, I thought that would be the end of him, But there is no end of him.
I would say this. I'm going to push back a little bit because I think that there are quite a few. I mean, the $64,000 question here is, I mean, how many Republicans actually are there and how many exist? Now, a lot of them are appearing in ads. I mean, there's this Republicans Against Trump sort of PAC that has been created by the Lincoln Project. You know those guys? There are a bunch of
That's the Steve Schmidt, Bill Kristol group,
Schmidt,
right? Yeah.
Bill Kristol, John Weaver, a bunch of pretty well-known Republican media guys, or, consultants, sort of Washington types who have sort of banded together. They all have no use for Trump, and they have raised a ton of money and made some really good anti-Trump ads. I mean, far better than anything the Democrats, I think, have made. That, granted, have gone pretty viral inside a media ecosystem on Twitter and stuff like that. But they're very effective. I mean, but look, there are some data points that would indicate that a lot of those Republicans who voted for Trump 4 years ago are not going to vote for him this time. And one of the data points is that Republicans have pretty much underperformed in every election since 2016. Every special election, every off-year election, certainly the midterm elections. And, Trump's poll numbers have been pretty low from the get-go. He's polling really badly against Biden. And also, I mean, I saw this stat a couple of weeks ago. There was something like basically 48% of all the Republicans in Congress who were in Congress the day Donald Trump was elected have either retired, been defeated, or are not running again right now. So a lot of them are going by way, they're just leaving, and they don't like Trump. I mean, they will say it privately, and they just don't want the hassle of going to war with him privately or publicly because it's not fun. And, they just want to get on with their lives. But the fact is, the Republican Party is shrinking. It's certainly shrinking demographically, and you don't know where their next generation is going to come from because, their thinking has been completely short term. It's like, what will get me, through the day without getting into a big pissing match with the president? What will get me through my election? Now, a lot of them are in very safe districts, so they can sort of spout off. But it doesn't bode well for the future of that party right now. But obviously, as it's happening, it's scary as hell.
Well, meanwhile, a guy like Hogan's here in Maryland just sort of rubbing his hands together to be the next guy. Citizens here be damned, quite frankly. We're seeing him on the Love In tour. He's trying to move into the front seat of that boat now, isn't he?
I think a lot of people are. I mean, Larry Hogan is, he's trying to sort of get into a moderate lane. And, he almost ran against Trump this time. I don't know how serious he was. But, his whole thing is, look, I've been elected a couple times in a very blue state. I'm pretty moderate. I don't love Trump. I didn't vote for him in 2016. And, I guess he seems to be getting fairly high marks for his coronavirus response. And I guess he's term limited, and he's already talking about running next time. But no, there are a lot of people. And I just did a story on Liz Cheney a couple weeks ago, and she's now in the crosshairs of a lot of the other Republicans in Congress for claiming that she's been too critical of Trump and too critical of too praising of Dr. Fauci. I mean, it's just craziness, but I don't know. I just don't really, I guess if you take a long view, it's hard to see how this ends well for this crew.
Mark Leibovich is our guest. This Town, the Big Game, the New York Times. You can follow him at Mark Leibovich on Twitter. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, Mark, I want you to blow holes in a theory that I have. That this loyalty to Trump is really based on nothing more than political survival driven by the gerrymandered districts that we have all across the country. You had mentioned the fact that most of these folks are in safe districts, and whether it's a Lindsey Graham or you name it, any of the other elected across the nation, they have this issue that even though the Republican Party may be shrinking, that in a Republican primary, there's incredible loyalty to Donald Trump, and they don't know how to navigate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, there is a far bigger threat to their political careers from a right-leaning primary opponent than to the left. I mean, and you're right. I mean, that's a direct result of gerrymandering, which is just sort of basically redesigning a bunch of congressional districts to the benefit of whatever party is in power. So, yeah, no, it's pretty bizarre. But, I mean, these people are terrified of losing. I mean, politics is their only game, and it's their sustenance, and it's where their ego is gratified, and it's where their earning power is, both sort of now and in the future. And yeah, I mean, it might be distasteful to them privately, but they've all kind of made the same deal. And maybe what makes them politicians is that they can live with themselves, whereas others might not be able to.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. The other thing, Mark, that I'm always curious about, Nestor tells listeners all the time that the only thing he ever wanted to be was John Stedman, who's a legendary sports writer here in Baltimore with the Baltimore News American.
Sure.
Curious about
either him or Oscar Madison, by the way. Yeah.
Or Oscar Madison, right? You used Oscar also. I'm curious with you, when you were growing up or in school or a young reporter, was there a reporter or someone that you looked up to and said, man, that's who I want to be. I want to write like him. I want to be Jimmy Breslin, or I want to be whoever.
Oh, man. You know what? To be perfectly honest with you, Don, we know what got me into journalism was I needed a job. I was an English major in college. I was just bouncing around. It was the early 90s. The economy was really in bad shape. And, I got a job answering phones at a weekly newspaper. And that's when I kind of realized that, I'm not making any money, but I kind of like the people I'm hanging around. And, But I mean, eventually when I started reading, I mean, you know, Richard Ben Kramer, who's a Baltimore guy, one of the great political writers, you know, ever, was one of my idols. And then I started reading David Halberstam's books and Jenny Breslin. Yes, I was old enough to know good stuff. I mean, you know, after you sort of catch the bug, you read as much as you can, and then hopefully you can get yourself some jobs. I mean, and a lot of it's just luck. You just sort of hope you get hired in the right places, and you know, then you get to be in your 50s like I am now, and be able to look back and say, "Huh, someone's actually paid me to do this for a few, you know, a few decades now," and like it feels like a real racket. But I mean, I would say no. I mean, I don't generally. I mean, I guess I have a kind of a short-term survival instinct, which is what's going to get this story in the paper? Like, what's going to get this blank page filled with a bunch of words, you know? And hopefully there'll be this internal voice that can sort of get me from point A to point B. But, like, I mean, I guess sports was my first love, so I've been reading the great columnists in, you know, the Boston Globe, where I grew up in Massachusetts, and been reading Tom Boswell when I got down to D.C., and you know, Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon, and just everyone. I mean, it's just like a whole crew of these people you admire, and one day, you know, one day you actually get to meet them, and you try not to be too starstruck in the press box, and I don't know. I mean, I wish there were like a science to like, this is what I wanted to be, and this is how we got there. But you know, it's all like one big happy accident, I guess.
Is your process, Mark, in writing a book and writing a column for New York Times Magazine, for the same process, or do you go about it differently?
You know, it's usually the same kind of haphazard process. I mean, I need to just start the story. I mean, you hear people say, "Well, I write the third section first, and then I write an outline, and then I build a little a little map on my floor, and then I do this, and then I put this here, and I cut this out here." You know, I need to like get a first line, and then a first paragraph, and then first 3 paragraphs, and then usually after that, maybe 10 paragraphs, I'll have an idea in my head where how I'm going to get like to the next section or the next point, and then what I got to do to get myself out of the story, depending on how long it is. I mean, obviously it depends on whether it's a shorter poem or a longer feature or a book, right? I mean, books are a real bitch because, can I say bitch on this?
Yeah, it's perfect.
You can edit that if you want.
No, that's good.
But
we bitch a lot here. Yes.
There's a lot of words that I can't keep in my head. But there's a lot of information. I don't have that kind of bandwidth. So you got to sort of like, wait, did I write that yet? Have I made that point? Or I use that phrase? Or I use that quote? But no, I mean, again, I'm not one of these like big fancy outlines. I usually don't go in with a plan, except that I have an idea. What I try to do is I try to listen to my own internal voice about what's interesting and what I'm sort of telling my colleagues when I come back to the office after a reporting trip, like what stories I'm telling, what made me laugh, what I'm remembering. That's usually a pretty good indicator of what will be hopefully interesting to readers. I mean, the kind of things that I find myself dwelling on and having other people laugh at and things like that.
This is the point where I promote The Big Game as one of my favorite sports books, certainly of this century. I'm not going to put you up against Semi-Tough or North Dallas 40. That's last century, okay?
No, don't do that.
Or the Bronx Zoo or any of that. Or so I'm going to move it into this century.
Bronx Zoo.
Mark Leibovich wrote The Big Game, and Don, I would tell you from a football perspective, from an insider who just sort of swooped into what I've been doing for 25 years and really got it right, like all the way down the middle. But I guess this is the point where I start to say to you, well, this Trump thing feels like you sort of doing some sort of Sacha Baron Cohen underground, embed yourself and have some stories or whatever, drinking on Lindsey Graham's bus or something. I don't know, but when it comes to writing this and where you are in the process of what the NFL represents and what Donald Trump represents, I've seen incredible parallels between the way Trump operates and the way Peter Angelos has operated here, a baseball team for 25 years. I mean, I could write a nice long-form story about the parallels just between the two of them.
I can't. It is pretty amazing. I mean, the thing about being a sports owner is you can't get voted out, right? I mean, if sports owners had to run for re-election, I'm guessing Peter Angelos would not be in his job right now.
You had to push Nestor's button, didn't you, Mark? You had to push his button.
I did. Yeah,
it's because the Red Sox are playing the Orioles this week. That's what it is.
Do that? Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, this is like, it's hard to get excited about sports. I never have said that before. I mean, baseball season. I mean, part of it might just be Red Sox are going to be terrible, but also, I was just going to work with no fans, and I'm pissed off at the players, and I'm pissed off at the owners, and the fact that it's taken this long, and I don't know, it just doesn't seem like a great sport for. I mean, I guess any sports will be welcome at this point, but that is not something I can get excited about. The NFL, I don't know how they're going to pull this off. The NBA might have a shot. I mean, this bubble thing seems like it's going fairly well, and there are most people are testing negative. I guess everyone tested. All the players yesterday tested negative for the virus, which was a surprise. But no, I mean, look, I mean, everything is kind of an empire, right? And empires end. And the question is, what empire is going to end first? And obviously, with Trump, there's an election, which is always a natural end point, or certainly a natural inflection point for when empires end. But, sports, I think, are going to always be, have a pretty powerful hold on the American psyche. But, I mean, nothing is forever, and I think the NFL might learn that, in the next few decades now, and they're not a terribly well-run league, as I was able to explore both between the commissioner and the owners. And
should have done more on Dan Snyder down there, Mark.
Oh man, he had a really rough week last week, huh? I mean, to be honest with you, and this just sort of goes to how petty and miserable I am, but I can never root for the team. But this is like a mark of like a true Boston fan. I can't move anywhere else and hope anyone can be happy. So it's always fun to see the Redskins deteriorate to the degree to which they have. I know so many unhappy Redskins fans over what's gone on with that franchise over the last couple since I've moved here, and that's actually been kind of fun to follow. But wow, even for them, I mean, this has been a bad few weeks.
Mark, we appreciate it. Go ahead, Don. Wrap it up for us.
Oh yeah, I was going to say. Well, I have two quick things, Nestor.
Sure.
One, Mark, you touched on it in your book, The Big Game, and that is the whole threat to football. And I think you used Favre and I forget who the other quarterback was, who was concerned about their own children playing football. I hear that all the time from young moms and dads. How big a threat is that to the game, Mark?
No, it's a huge threat. I mean, it's a huge threat. I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to make football safe. I mean, forget the coronavirus. I mean, it's a whole other category. I mean, look, no one walks away unscathed, and the participation numbers on letting kids play football are just way down, and I don't think that's going to immediately eliminate the talent pool. But I mean, I don't think it's like a 10, 20-year threat, but it's certainly a 40, 50-year threat. But the other thing is, things turn really, really quickly. I mean, one of the lessons of this summer and has been just how fast sensibilities have changed around race, around things like the Redskins' names and the Confederate flag in Mississippi, and where people are in polls as far as race relations. And I think one of the things Trump has done is he's tried to sort of run against a backlash to all of these protests, and it hasn't really existed. And I think that's been a real stunner. So, I mean, who's to say that, like, people might just decide to turn against football for any number of reasons? And football could take a serious hit. I mean, look, I mean, who's to say? I mean, there's no question in my mind that a whole bunch of players are going to kneel to the national anthem, if they ever start games. And how's the predominantly conservative fan base of the NFL going to handle that? I mean, Trump has already said he's taking a walk. So, I mean,
Well, we saw NASCAR fans boo Bubba Wallace and hold up the Confederate flag. So I think that's if past the prologue, I think we get a view of what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, NASCAR, though, I mean, talk about, I mean, I never followed NASCAR. It's never really been my thing. But, I mean, from the outside, I think the leadership of NASCAR has taken an incredibly courageous stand on this stuff this summer. I mean, I don't know. I mean, well, actually, I guess they've had really big ratings.
Well, they've taken a much bigger stand than, let's say, Mitch McConnell has, right?
Well, or Roger Goodell.
Or,
Goodell
yeah.
did this recovery tour this summer a little bit, but no, I mean, like that to me. And again, I don't. That's not something I follow closely, but I was stunned by that. And again, like Mississippi, just saying, on one hand, it's like, oh my God, they still have the Confederate flag in their state flag. Like, what's that about? But I mean, it just happened. So, a lot of this out in the open, and I think one thing that we've learned when things get out in the open, things do tend to change faster. So, I mean, we'll see where the NFL is on the other end of all this.
Don, you got any more for Mark? Go for it.
I got one last thing, Nestor. I love it because Mark's been I want to get his take. He's been an outspoken critic of sort of a Washington tradition, and that is the one and only correspondence dinner. And you have not been a fan of David Gregory doing a dance up there with Karl Rove. It hasn't floated your boat. Is that safe to say?
No. Yeah, no, there's like a whole bunch of, we're all part of the same deal, we're all part of the same party. But that's one of the good things about the pandemic is all this stuff's been canceled this year. So you don't have to worry about it.
What was it, Mark? What was it, Mark, as a journalist that rubbed you the wrong way about the correspondence dinner?
Oh, just the whole thing, just coziness. I mean, look, what exactly are we celebrating? It's not like, like Washington is like beloved and doing all these great things. And like, I think journalism is the greatest profession ever, but you can only celebrate yourself so many times a year. And like, we get the Pulitzers and, we basically get to like write stuff and get paid for it. So that's enough of a scam. What do we need to like celebrate all the time?
We're trying to keep the Baltimore Sun in business around here so they can win more Pulitzers and bring down more corrupt mayors. You know what I mean?
It's a great newspaper, or at least it was. I mean, it's like a lot of newspapers have gone on hard times. I mean, everyone should subscribe to a newspaper. I don't care what it is.
Amen.
Appreciate you, Mark. Thanks for coming on and always answering the call. And the big game and paperback now, is that correct? We can still get it?
Oh, yeah, it's in paperback. And, it's all out there. And, support it. Look, these are it's a good time to read. Like, you can read in private. You don't have to breathe on anyone. You don't have to be breathed on by anyone. You can do it air conditioned. Well, the book is air conditioned, but there are spaces that are air conditioned. So, so buy the book. But either way, everyone be well. And Nestor, thanks for having me on. Don, great to meet you. And we'll do it again.
Well, I hope so.
Mark,
Safe. Mark Leibovich joining us here. The big game, our town, all that good stuff in the New York Times. You can find him out on Twitter at Mark Leibovich. And we're good books are sold. And when they shut the NFL down in Week 5 because of COVID, you'll have a good NFL book to read. The big game. I highly recommend it. Don Moeller, former Baltimore County executive, and myself, all of our sponsors, Taharka, made in Baltimore, the Honey Graham ice cream and the Graham Cracker Swirl, using the award-winning ice cream to serve up social change, our friends at Taharka. Don't forget State Fair out in Catonsville and the new El Guapo, named after me. Thank you very much, Evan Brown. That's opening later on in the month. We'll get some pupusas, some margaritas, and some tacos as well. Shipping crab cakes all over the world. That's what they do at Fadley's of Lexington Market. Gosh, we miss our sit-downs with Damie, and we had Brandon Scott down there. He's about to become mayor. We hopefully get back down there again next year. You can ship those Fadley's crab cakes anywhere in the world. Don't forget Moeller and Gary Realty. Jeff Moeller joined me for a spirited, lengthy chat about the market and low interest rates and buying and selling homes here in the Charm City. You can find that out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault as well, and find Jeff at MoellerandGary.com. I am Nestor on behalf of former Baltimore County Executive Don Moeller. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Calm, local, Baltimore positive.